after a successful trial, we have rolled out the NHS COVID Pass. This allows people safely and securely to demonstrate their COVID status, whether it's proof of vaccination status, test results, or natural immunity. People will also be able to demonstrate proof of a negative test result. Although we don't encourage its use in essential settings like supermarkets, other businesses and organisations in England can adopt the pass as a means of entry where it's suitable for their venue or premises, and when they can see its potential to keep their clients or their customers safe. But for proprietors of venues and events where large numbers are likely to gather and likely to mix with people from outside their households for prolonged periods, deploying the pass is the right thing to do. The pass has an important role to play in slowing the spread of the virus, and so we reserve the right to mandate its use in the future. Next, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to update the House on vaccination as a condition of entry. At the end of September, we plan to make full vaccination a condition of entry to those high-risk settings where large crowds gather and interact. As a condition of entry to these venues, people will need to show that they are fully vaccinated, and proof of a negative test will no longer be sufficient.
Order, Mr. Speaker, on which I have given you notice, and I've also notified the Leader of the House of Commons. You'll be aware yesterday a statement was made at the dispatch box by the Parliamentary Under-Secretary of the Department for Health and Social Care about vaccine passports, and there's a relevant piece, Mr. Speaker, which potentially pertains to the House of Commons. He said, by the end of September, everyone aged 18 and over will have had the chance to receive full vaccination and the additional 2 weeks for that protection to take hold. So at that point, we plan to make full vaccination a condition of entry to nightclubs and other venues where large crowds gather. Proof of a negative test will no longer be sufficient. Now, it seems to me, Mr. Speaker, particularly on a Wednesday when we get back to normal, that definition could equally apply to this House of Commons. It would be outrageous if the executive were to attempt to prevent any member of Parliament attending this House to represent our constituents without first undergoing a medical procedure. And Mr. Speaker, I raise it with you because I hope you'll be able to make a ruling on this matter. And in closing, I would just note that your 17th century predecessor, Speaker Lenthal, stood up very effectively against an overmighty executive. And it didn't end well for the overmighty executive.
It did lead to the end of the monarchy as well, I might have for a short period. So let's hope we're not quite going by that far. What I would say is I'm very grateful for the Honourable Member giving me notice, and I've had no indication that government considers the policy is mentioned should apply to this House. What I would say, Speaker of this House, there is nothing to stop a member coming into here. You have the right to come to this House unless this House otherwise says so. And I've got to say, the government's not been in touch. I don't expect them to be in touch because as far as I'm concerned, it doesn't apply to members. Right.
Exactly.
All right. There have been a number of reports of patients who shed viral RNA for weeks, as determined by PCR. It doesn't seem to be infectious virus. And the real question is, are they a threat for transmission? And I'm wondering if you think we could use a cutoff of viral loads determined by PCR to say this patient is no longer infectious, can go home, can go to a nursing facility. Because right now the physicians are really having a hard time with that.
Right. Again, a good question. And what is now sort of evolving into a bit of a standard that if you get a cycle threshold of 35 or more, that the chances of it being replication competent are minuscule. So that if somebody, and we have patients, and it's very frustrating for the patients as well as for the physicians. Somebody comes in and they repeat their PCR and it's like 37 cycle threshold. But you almost never can culture virus from a 37 threshold cycle. So I think if somebody does come in with 37, 38, even 36, you got to say, it's just dead nucleotides, period.
Yeah, because as you know, we can't easily culture infectious viruses. You don't have a BSL-3 lab everywhere.
Exactly.
It's a problem.
Exactly.
Okay.
So is the threshold cycle is reporting that a pretty standard practice in doing a diagnosis now, rather than just positive or negative? Okay, good.
Yeah, I mean, if when you go in, when I get my test, you know, it's negative. When someone comes in and it's positive, they don't give them the threshold until you go back and ask for it.
Okay, but they've got it.
They've got
freedom marches all over the world this Saturday, and never has there been a more important time than now. There are worldwide freedom rallies everywhere: UK, London, Dublin, Ireland, Belfast, Northern Ireland, Amsterdam, Netherlands, Brisbane, Australia, Italy, France, Canada, everywhere. And all the different locations for worldwide freedom rallies can be found on Telegram. Now, I know a lot of people have said these protests not going to change anything. They're a waste of time. Look, we've got to be positive, okay? Things have to grow. Look at the protests early last year in the UK and look how they have grown over time. They've gotten massive as things have become more and more clearer. If anything, think of them as a way of gauging just how many people are on our side, who are seeing things the same way as we do. It's clear the mainstream media don't want the normies to see how big the protests have gotten. That's why they shut out that story on the news. Think of them as a way of collectively taking stock of what's going on. Think of the protest as a way of meeting others and planning ahead. And think of them as a way of sending a message to not necessarily the governments of your country, because they don't give a stuff. What's the point? Think of them as a way of sending a message to the people of the country.
Through public record, public statements, that an element of the election system was actually compromised or breached during the course of the November 2020 election. It is a matter of public statement by Maricopa County, as well as legal action and law enforcement action surrounding that particular incident. The registration server that was public facing did have unauthorized access to that. In cybersecurity terms, it was breached.
Based on the data we're seeing, I highly recommend to do the canvassing, because it's the one way to know for sure whether some of the data we're seeing, if it's real problems or whether it's clerical errors of some sort. So for example, we have 74,243 mail-in ballots where there is no clear record of them being sent. And just to be clear, here in the state of Arizona, there's EV32s and EV33s. EV32s is supposed to give a record of when a mail-in ballot is sent, and EV33 is supposed to give a record of when